All right, yeah, so we're live. Today we're gonna be talking about Bronze Age mindset, and this book is. And we're also gonna touch on Bap a little bit himself, and his role in the sphere. And I think this is necessary because Bronze Age mindset has it's definitely contributed to a pretty sizable portion of what I guess you could call the dissident right, and before that the alt right, kind of subscribing to these ideas. And this book, when it came out, certainly very influential. And people have a lot of contentious beliefs or feelings about Bronze Age pervert himself, whatever Costin, But I think this is a worthwhile topic. Agree or disagree to go over this book. So if you guys do we want to jump right in here and start out with you guys want to do the first the 33 to 36 or whatever, the kind of modern homosexual. What do you
Yeah, we
guys?
should start there, but perhaps just give a rundown on BAP and a bit of the sphere as a whole. And I can do that if you guys
Yeah,
want.
yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, if you like. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Good.
So so with BAP and Bronze Age mindset and Bronze Age pervert, right? Constantine, I believe his name, is this is from this side of the sphere that has a more Nietzschean aspect to it, and is the BAP himself influenced a lot of this side of the sphere, and he could be called the founder as well. And they focus on vitalism and on escaping society and focus more on the individual than on the community. I believe even reading Bronze Age mindset and what we'll
Yeah.
talk about now, I believe there's a deeper focus on the individual as a part of the right than on the nation or on the collective. So that's an interesting distinction to keep in mind while we will go into the sections that we picked out, because we
Yeah.
will base this discussion on certain sections that we picked out from the book, 35 to 36, which Bab said are the core of the book, and the final sections from 70 to 77, which are
Hmm.
a more diverse general perspective of the future in his perspective and of the book itself. So I'll give it to Wiswin now to talk a little bit more on before we get into it.
Yeah. So when it comes to the BAP sphere, BAP himself, I find the most interesting part of the entire system he's developed is the context, the historical context, if you can call it that, from which he develops this time in the nascent online right, where we didn't have any kind of major figures. The origins of Baptist thought can be seen in strains of what might have originally been called the manosphere. I know that that term gets thrown around a lot in feminist circles, but we see the same trends, especially in the sections you mentioned about 30. I think it was passage 33 or 34 where he talks a little bit more about the modern homosexual, the male body and stuff.
Yeah.
You do see that kind of self improvement through line, in how he discusses the ideal mindset of a right winger. But again, at the time when BAP originated, there wasn't really any major online figures. The online world was fairly new. I guess if we put out to like the time of publishing, that was when was this book published? It was like 2018 or so, right?
Oh,
2018,
I
yeah.
thought. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Man, I thought it was a couple years before that. That makes a lot more sense now. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
So this is right after like the Trump victory. It
Right.
was the middle of the first Trump presidency. The
Yeah.
online right had started out as like kind of a click
Charlotte.
on 4chan and
Yeah.
some of these more minor communities that have a very overzealous opinion on how much they influence politics. But I suppose that's another topic. Um, and Bob filled this niche of somebody who could appeal to this growing right wing movement, this crossover between the self improvement side of the online right and this sort of paganistic. I use that term loosely. I know that the modern Bob has appealed a lot more to the pagan mindset, but originally I don't think
Yeah, it wasn't
that was a
so
major
much.
contributor. That's more of a recent development within the sphere. But you do see that sort of mindset in the beginning of the right as people fell out of favor with Christianity. It's actually more of a modern, um, if we say within the last few years, that Christian movements have become much stronger on the right, and a lot of that can be owed to people like Fuentes. But he filled that niche of somebody who could, of somebody for which the right, the online distant movement could centralize around. I'm trying to think of other figures. I guess there was Richard Spencer.
Yeah, that
He preceded Bap, but the thing
yeah,
with Richard Spencer is that he always came across as part of the institutions. It's something about the way he speaks. He's an intellectual, and I don't disagree with everything he says. I find a lot of it to be interesting, actually, even though there is some off-putting stuff
yeah,
that he's produced. But he had this mainstream sensibility that could not operate within the paradigm that the distant circles were trying to convey, like 4chan, poll, the Twitter, the frog Twitter. That's what it was called, right? They would never accept somebody who had ties to mainstream institutions or presented themselves as I guess an optic cut mainstream figure. So you have Bob who comes in and he's anonymous. He doesn't speak English very well, or at least he presents himself as somebody who doesn't speak English very well. He writes this book that's published independently online about these very, very transgressive ideas about how right wing people should structure their lives and how they should change the system. And that's a very appealing circumstance for a lot of people.
yeah, definitely. And just to kind of read the Richard Spencer thing, I that was sort of I remember that was sort of the salad days, I guess, for me when I was still kind of lurking around online, and Spencer did seem like a figure throughout like this sort of burgeoning what we thought was a going to be a movement, and it did have quite a bit of energy and quite a bit of vigor.
Yeah,
However, yeah, and I do think, however, unfortunately, I there were like huge mistakes made, and I don't want to place all the blame on Richard because, like you said, this there were people that sort of rejected him outright, and whatever. Nevertheless, I do think that that could have gone somewhere, but I think that Richard himself made some mis- sort of irrehensible mistakes that you couldn't come back from, right?
yeah.
Strategic
Well,
errors. Yeah. The there was the
mhm.
famous Hail Gate, and like whatever, however you feel about the Roman salute and shit like that. Like he brought the mainstream media in, like the Lugenpresse, right? The like enemy, like the regime propagandists in to every meetup, and he invited them everywhere he went, and he tried to like put himself. And I think I remember him actually saying this in person, saying, um, "We need to start acting like the mainstream, right? Like we're not the mainstream yet, but we need to start acting like it." And this is at
Yeah,
the NPI conference in like 2017 or whatever. And after that, it really kind of was went downhill from there. So I would agree. Yeah, Bat sort of comes in and he approached this as from a different angle. And again, I'm not putting all of this on Richard. I think that however, when you are a leader, you do have to sort of take responsibility when mistakes are made. And it wasn't just him. There were people, and there was Discord, and I believe probably federal intrigue, right, and informants that saboteurs, if you will, that were definitely within the ranks of this sphere. And but anyways, BAP sort of came in and
hmm,
approached this from a very different angle, an angle that was more, um,
it was more
I don't know.
nativist.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and like if we're
and he,
going to discuss it Sorry, I didn't
This
mean to
is
interrupt you
almost
there.
no. Oh no, no. I was just gonna say this one more thing.
Mhm.
And if you read Bronze Age mindset, it is a mindset, and like you said, so therefore it is the man. And there's this Evolian, and I guess he's obviously a big follower of Nietzsche, not Evola Bap, that is, but there is you do see this Evolian strain within the book here, within its ideas, right?
Mhm.
There's this mindset of like the spiritual aristocrat has to have in order for like a true rightist or like an archaeo-futurist civilization or a future high culture to eventually come in and take place. And in the earlier sections, I believe it's 36, we're going to get into it. He does talk about the difference between like the civilizations of the Orient, and of like the Near East and the Far East, of the ancient Chinese dynastic powers, and of like ancient Mesopotamia or something like that, right? And how the city and the Anglos kind of adopted this mode of what a civilized society or what a civilization is, right? And it was sort of
Mhm.
a continental idea about the civilization is actually, and again, Rousseau, we just talked about this a week and a half ago, or yeah, about a week and a half ago, that the civilization is actually they're independent organisms, and they're distinct, and they're, as Spengler says, that there's about nine of them, rather, if we include contemporary Russia, which he predicted would be the next flourishing great sort of cultural organism. So, anyways, yeah, I think we did a general introduction. So yeah, the it's a mindset for the spiritual aristocrat, the aristocrat of the soul, if you will. I think would be a good description of it. Whatever one thinks of the actual content or body of the work, I think that's was his intention. And I definitely think, just because of the size of his audience, we can say that he succeeded to some degree in instilling this mindset within some people. And I will admit, yeah, there's ideas in here that are definitely ones that I find I definitely find attractive.
Yeah, I mean, it's indisputable that Bap is a smart person, and he's approached this from a very strategic perspective. You mentioned a little bit about how he contrasts himself with Spencer, and not to belabor the same point there, but from a sociological perspective, you have this idea of the out group and the in group, and Spencer, I think it's indisputable that he was trying to present himself as a modern, Lincoln Rockwell kind of figure. He was trying to establish a mainstream American neo-Nazi party, and that's a difficult thing to do to begin with. But it's also not
Especially
what
in America.
appeals, especially in America. But it's also not what the modern right wing movement was born out of. It is almost entirely an internet-based movement. We don't have meetups, we don't have town halls, we don't have any kind of centralized authority. And so any kind of person who tries to become that centralized authority, at least overtly, is going to be pushed out because they're going to be seen as the out group. They're not going to be seen as somebody who is born from that movement. Bop, by obscuring his background, and this is important because he wasn't intellectual. He was somebody who did come from a higher society, you might say, not
Yeah.
necessarily high society, but he
No,
was
I yeah, yeah,
university educated.
he was a
He
member of that class.
Yeah, yeah, he was part of the higher class. He obscures some of that heritage, and he comes in presenting himself as somebody who was born in this movement. It's going to have a lot more appeal, and that's why a lot of the modern right was able to gravitate around his ideas. So all of that is, I mean, that context is important to understanding where he comes from, and why his ideas are so strange, perhaps, to the modern right wing movement. He draws influence, as you mentioned, from Evola, Mishima, a lot of these more esoteric figures, who Heraclitus and other Greek philosophers, that a lot of people probably wouldn't recognize my name.
Right, the
He draws,
pre-Socratics.
yeah, he draws from these influences in a way that was novel at the time. Now, I guess it's a fairly common thing to see. The pre Plato, the pre Aristotelian philosophers come up on Twitter and on other similar communities, but
Yeah, yeah,
he definitely
yeah,
started this trend. He moved the right wing from something that was basically a more extreme arm of of mainstream conservatism into something that was in itself a movement, an independent right wing movement, and that is important. And there's a lot of good that came out of it. Um, as much as he and his current ideas, the way he presents himself now may not be amenable to what I believe should be a right wing figure, or at least representative of the right wing movement I would like to see. He did start something. He did start something that has a fairly benevolent effect on the sphere.
I find it interesting and touching upon Nick's point and your point as well, Wiswin, about Richard Spencer, is that
Mhm.
BAP tells us to do the opposite of the mainstream, which is really interesting. And it goes perhaps too far by saying that we should be the subversive brothels or fund the brothels and have this network of international subversives working. And it's like, well, I don't want to be
hmm
the brothels of society, but I understand your point, and that's a real good point because we shouldn't attempt to be the mainstream as much as we should try to subvert it. So in that sense, BAP has a really interesting concept of action. And when Nick says that BAP is influenced by Evola, even in his writing, you can almost sense that the objective is the same, in the sense that
Yeah,
BAP doesn't writes in a way that is almost universal, in the sense that he's writing for everyone that wants to read it. He's not thinking of a particular nation or a particular state. He's going for this aristocratic international class and everybody that should read it and should accept this Bronze Age mindset should unite. So that's interesting. And to start going into the sections, we start out on the section 30, where it delves into modern homosexuality and how it's affected by society. And the point we should keep in mind is that this aspect of homosexuality, modern homosexuality, is forced upon us on BAP's perspective by this oppressive, almost Oedipal societal structure that oppresses masculinity. And we could say that BAP's project is to push back this masculinity into society, and it does it with a focus on the individual, as I said before. So perhaps that's why he justifies his posting of homoerotic content on the internet, on X, of the naked man and all of that, because he says that it's a way to influence others to try to achieve the same. And well, I don't know if I buy that, but fine, we'll go with it. Um, so when he
right,
talks
right.
about this oppressive societal structure in civilization, it's interesting because he makes the distinction and I really like this distinction. He makes the distinction between this civilizational oppression based on almost this matriarchal set of values, and he contrasts it with the concept of the hive, of the bee's nest. And the bee's nest is interesting because it has a queen, but Bab says that, well, in the nest or in the hive, everybody has, or every bee has this purpose. And we see that this purpose has been lost in human society. So that's a really interesting point that he makes. And we could say that, well, that makes him, perhaps that's why we could point him as a fascist in many ways, even if he has a focus on the individual and on the Nietzschean perspective, the way he has this glorification of the hive, of the sense of purpose in society, could say that, well, that's a fascist belief. And that's interesting as well. But then when he starts touching on the solutions to fix modern society, well, it gets a bit strange. For example, when he talks about this homoerotic or this homosexual nature of modern society, he contrasts it with the 50s of when homosexual men would create these underground societies of these cliques where one could free himself from the chains of modernity. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it's where you could be free. And it's like, I guess
Yeah,
the point you're trying to make is interesting because you're talking about these groups of men that could live outside of society and be themselves. But why are you picking the homosexual groups from the 50s? That's a little bit strange. And even to the point that exit, and this is my counter argument to some of it. Uh, we could escape civilization, we can escape society, but when we do it, we should try to be something more and not something less. Fine, we can be subversive, but we shouldn't attach ourselves to vice. And in the homosexual society of the 50s, of the underground societies, we could tell that it's not good in the subversive sense that he talks about because it's attached to vice. It's attached to perhaps evil lust, if you could say. So when we, and this is, I want to raise awareness to this, is that when we exit civilization, we should do it with a set of our own beliefs that are sure to upheld stronger values than those that we have right now in society. So it's not enough, in my perspective, to reject modernity or reject society or return to monkey, as some would say. We should reject society, yes, but we
There
should
needs
do
to
it
be
and
a
focus
positive
on
vision.
in a positive vision, exactly, as a, and this is how the individual perspective lacks, because an individual has a harder time doing this. If you exit society with a group, or if you exit society to belong into a group, and well, Bab talks about it with the almost Bronze Age mindset that unites all of these aristocrats, international aristocrats, if you'd say. Well, but that's a bit abstract, too abstract. Our sphere, and at least myself, I situate myself a bit away from BAP in some senses, and this is the one I situate myself the most, is in this sense of collective, as a less abstract way of going about it, with a focus on the material sense, on the material qualities. So instead of going for this universal class of aristocrats, perhaps it's safer, and well, safe, Bab could say that safe isn't always better, but it's safer to exit civilization and belong to the family, perhaps, or to a close knit group that shares your values and could help you exist outside of society or assemble forces outside of society to reclaim it. And when you push this individualism and even antagonize the version of the family a bit too much, you lose it, and you could fall into vice. Where and then I point to the communities of the 50s of the homosexuals. Well, BAP himself admits that AIDS and I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, but well, that those diseases that came with those
Yeah,
habits, well, destroyed
I
the
think we should
community.
be.
Why?
I
Because
think
it
we
was
should be good.
based on vice. So yeah, I'll let you guys comment on that one.
No, I think that's overall a good point about the sort of cosmopolitan nature of Baptist rhetoric. He is not a racialist. That is one of the more disagreeable parts of his philosophy, his ideology. When we approach it from our right wing perspective, he does not invoke any of the racial rhetoric. He does write his book for an aristocratic class, and in a sense, you could say that it is almost purely like the extreme side of how Evola might position himself on the racial question, because you do have that kind of aristocracy that is divorced from any material boundaries. Race is purely a question of the soul. I think that the idea we should fraternize with people of similar ideological perspectives, and by I guess Bob's euphemistic acknowledgement here is through the homosexual communities. I I do think we should fraternize with them, at least on some level. But that fraternization cannot override the fidelity we should feel for people who are our racial compatriots. Just because an aristocracy can be developed out of intelligent, like-minded, I guess, higher order people, the Ubermensch, the Nietzschean Ubermensch here, it doesn't mean that it should be or that it is efficacious in the development of a civilization. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's my
Oh,
essential thoughts on the racialism here.
oh, yeah, yeah. Did you wanna continue,
No, no,
or
no,
do you
no.
want me to
Continue.
pick it? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. That would be a major critique for me as well, that he doesn't embrace that aspect of it, because that one, I mean, that's sort of something that is inherently true, right? And whether you have this sort of, I posted about this not long ago, whether you have the sort of Anglo conception of what race is, or the continental view, I think that there's a synthesis, excuse me, between those two that needs to come together. Like, it's not this purely biological determinist aspect, but it also isn't purely an aspect of the soul, right? There, it has to be a synthesis. Now, I am, we're all products of where we come from, and so I probably would land more on the side of the Anglosphere, but that's neither here nor there. I think as far as he's writing it universally, I would agree with you, Rain, it is fairly abstract, and it does kind of, I think it needs to be a bit more narrow in its objectives. However, I would say that perhaps the what he's trying to create is a set of civilizations or distinct culture organisms of the past, where each one of them had representatives or ambassadors, if you will, that could that were worthy of this kind of noble or aristocratic title, that could, where you could host foreign dignitaries, and they would come in, and they would it wouldn't be this sort of low sort of what we get with diplomacy now, where the statesman is usually like just some shitty politician. Like, right, he talks about the lower class, and the lower caste of men. So maybe that's what he means as far as this sort of international class of like aristocrats of the soul, right? Where everyone is worthy of being in the same room with one another and discussing affairs of I don't know, maybe this is like too specific, but discussing affairs of the world, or affairs of the state, or affairs between each distinct culture organism. And then on the other part, I wanted to talk about where he cites Camille Paglia, and we are talking about this just before we started recording, about post-industrial society is and the over socialization of man sort of creates this effeminate man, right? I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that's always existed, but there were social stigmas around it that sort of made it untenable to practice. As he said, there were these underground gay nightclubs in the 50s or whatever, the gay bathhouses and stuff like that, as he's talked about pretty regularly on Twitter. But he does talk about something that I think is interesting, that in order to be subversive, it is I would agree, it is a bit strange that he brings up that example, but I think when he talks about the sort of sensitive young man, right off the bat, the sensitive young man who's looking for, who's like adventurous, and he seeks exploration, almost like the archetypal Faustian man, right? And he doesn't find it in space and the territory around him, so he looks inward, right? And you find that within sexuality or whatever, right? So I think that you could interpret that. And then when he sees examples of like what's called quote unquote the masculine of modernity, he sees it almost through a lens of like what Baudrillard would see it. Like it's nothing more than a simulacra, right? Or a simulacrum. I forget which is the plural, simulacra or simulacrum. But so he sees like this faux
You need to learn
masculinity,
some
and
Latin. Simulacra. It's a
yeah,
neuter
okay,
noun.
yeah. I need Whistling up on that. So yeah, I think that he sees that for what it is, and so because there's no space or territory around him to, to exert this will to infinity, right? This metaphysical will to infinity, he looks inward and perhaps explores his own sort of boundaries, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So anyways, did you when do you guys want to pick it up?
I want.
Well, oh, sorry. I just want to say something briefly. I do actually agree with his the perspective that he provides from Paglia here. Paglia. I'm giving her
Yeah.
like a strange Italian like accent. Paglia.
Is it
Uh,
Palia? I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, but I do actually agree that the modern homosexual behavior is a post-industrial effect, and Bob's perspective on how that develops, when he discusses things like the Greek and the Roman ideas about homosexuality, sexuality in general, the conveyance of what it means to be a homosexuality has changed deeply. The pre-industrial perspective, and I'm not necessarily saying it is part of the Industrial Revolution. I think the over socialization occurs due to the modern age more than the industrial age. But the pre-industrial perspective on homosexuality was performative. The idea that somebody was gay was linked almost inherently with the idea of sodomy, engaging in sex in that way. So if you were sodomized, you were gay. But the modern perspective is about the inherent sexual identity of the individual. So even if you never have sex with a man as a man, but you have this inherent feeling of attraction towards men, that's what makes you homosexual. So that introspective, that sensitive aspect, the sensitive young boy, I
That's
guess
a good point.
vying to
That's a good
understand
point.
his own identity, is part of that. It is part of that over socialized perspective. We compare ourselves to other people in a very novel way. Sexual identity is less about performance and more about just your inherent feeling.
Yeah, that's a,
Uh,
that's a good point. I'll let Rain. I know you want to go. I just wanted to
Yeah.
say, yeah, that rethinking that a little bit. That's definitely a good point.
Yeah, I want to touch on that homosexual aspect of society, but first I want to touch upon the matriarchy and the Wong House, as Bob calls it, because Bob talks about spooks, and I think the idea of the matriarchy is a bit of a spook in some ways, because it's almost like a pacifying agent in the sense that it takes the right wing and tells you you should hate women, or you should,
Hmm.
society as is what it is because of women, are too much freedom or whatever. And I'll give a funny example just to start off my point. And hopefully this is right because I don't remember it that well. But you guys know Dune, right? The book by Frank Herbert. There's
Yeah.
the Bene Gesserit, and the Bene Gesserit are like this group of old ladies that supposedly control everything behind the scenes. So that's the matriarchy. But then in the book, you come to find out that the Bene Gesserit, the group, is actually basing itself on something, on this book, or on this script that was actually written by a man when the organization was founded. And why am I bringing this up? Because I'll compare it to, yes, women are in positions of power, and certain women have this oppressive nature that seems to drive down men. But we should perhaps push away the view. We should look from it. We should look at it from afar and think before we should see that, yeah, perhaps there's like these female authorities right now, but when you look at the structure, we see it that the structure itself is funded on something that isn't to blame, particularly because they're women, but because the structure itself benefits this certain oppression of male nature. So even if women didn't exist, I know that's a big hypothetical, men in the modern age would still be oppressed. That's where I want to take this
Yeah.
argument, because there's this certain, I've talked about this before, but there's this certain Oedipal uh, structure of society right now where most men, or those of us more masculine, are pushed away or rejected when they display themselves and their real personality. And Jung talks about this, and this is where I'll relate to homosexuality, because Jung talks about certain personality types that have trouble expressing themselves. And those personality types that have trouble expressing themselves sometimes have trouble talking to women. And when that happens, they develop this certain weighted homosexuality that Bab seems to not talk about. But it's really interesting because you almost understand that some modern men are actually gay by necessity because they've been uh, somehow manipulated into accepting this submissiveness or this reluctance to to take the dominant role, which is typically connected to the more masculine, and accept this feminine role as a necessity to survive in the social gathering, and they find it easier in that way. So I'll let you guys talk a bit about that too, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the longhouse metaphor has always annoyed me in some respect because
Same,
I
same here.
believe it gives too much agency, undue agency to women as the arbiters of femininity. In my perspective, femininity and masculinity are both aspects of man. And the femininity we see in women is a reflection of the femininity that man gravitates towards, or that man outputs. So a more feminine female, a more feminine woman is going to be reflective of a fairly masculine, or even even the androgyny inherent to man. So if a man establishes that these are the parameters that femininity can exist within, then the woman is going to reflect that. So the longhouse, that's a roundabout way of saying that the longhouse and the idea of the matriarchal structure is not a reflection of the woman as a political agent, but rather the man uh, pushing the equal role of political agency onto women of society. And that might be a little sexist. I don't mean to demean our lovely right wing women out there, but it stands to it stands to mention that in the Jungian sense, the man is composed of the anima. He contains a certain femininity within himself, and if he does exert the societal and political influence that he does, and this is a demonstrable reality, a universal constraint on all civilization, developed or undeveloped, then the longhouse, the matriarchy, has to, by extension, by natural causality, be a consequence of his own volition. Now, that sorry, I know you're unmuting yourself if you want to add something before I
Oh no,
carry
no,
on.
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. Finish up your point.
Yeah. Um, but oh, now I've lost my train of thought there.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's all right. It's all right. I'll let you speak. It's not your fault. I had a long-winded way of being sexist there, so I'll
All
let
right.
you speak.
Well, go ahead and interrupt me if you
Yeah.
come to it at any point. My analysis, I guess, of like the Longhouse, and it isn't super complex. The Longhouse sort of in antiquity is sort of the dwelling place of where women existed, that was their domain. And you mentioned like the idea of femininity and masculinity being sort of the being derived from men anyhow, right? And I would say that you see this in scripture too, right? Where I believe it's, and I'm not very good with scripture, but I mean, I'm not very well versed in scripture, but what was it? God took, was it the part
It
of
was the
man? I
rib.
forget.
Yeah, it took
The
the rib
rib,
out of Adam
yes.
to make to
Yeah,
make Eve. That is
right. So,
actually a perfect example of that
yeah.
philosophy.
Right, right. So you can almost see that, yeah, and this is according to scripture that the feminine archetype, if you will, is sort of made for the made out of and from the masculine, or from man himself, like materially or spiritually. But the longhouse, I understand the point that people make when with that mean that, like, you're eternally trapped in this domain, that where the feminine archetype is. Sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. I'm with my family. Um, yeah, if there's this. Now I just lost my train of thought.
You should invite them on. Let's see what their political opinions are.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, actually, they do pretty good. That's why I'm allowed to do these things here.
It is
But
Mother's Day after all.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
The Mother's
yeah.
Day
So
special, yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. But yeah. Oh, the idea of the longhouse. Yeah. So about man being like sort of trapped in this domain rather than a domain for women themselves. And a dwelling place for them. So I understand the meme, but I guess I don't. I think I would agree with you, Whistling, that is it's sort of you if you're in quote unquote the longhouse, you've been sort of put there. And then to Rain's point, I still think that modernity and the aspects of like late modernity or post modernity or whatever hyper modernity is it has these tendencies anyway, right? Even in this
Hmm.
hypothetical world where like let's say women are not are non-existent beings, you would still have these sort of oppressive features. I don't think that these would disappear. I think these are sort of intrinsic to modernity.
Yeah. No, I mean that makes sense, owing to the idea that femininity is an extension of man and not purely woman. We can oppress ourselves. We can force society to conform to the more feminine ideal. The more so when we discuss femininity and masculinity, we have this layer of performative behavior that we associate with women and men. Like women cook and clean the house, and men hunt and guard, and I don't know what other arbitrary masculine characteristics we want to assign to them. But that doesn't really illuminate what masculinity and femininity are on a platonic level. The real foundation is that masculinity is active. It is about the active manipulation of the world, and femininity is passive. It is about uh, passively abiding by nature, by the constraints established in the world. And so when we talk about the longhouse and the way I've always interpreted it, when people are complaining about being constrained inside that society, it means that they have no agency to decide their own fate. They're kind
Hmm.
of they're kind of imprisoned. I think the corporate office is the perfect example of what the
Yes.
longhouse could mean. It's
Yes.
this place where you don't really do anything useful. Nothing, nothing you
Yeah.
do that would be considered useful is ever reflected back onto you. You get the same pay, you get the same hours, you're stuck there, and you're constantly at the behest of somebody who is your superior. You can't do anything independently, and not only are you a dependent person, you're also one dependent person among thousands of others, or hundreds, or it depends on the size of your office, of course.
Kind of
Not to give away
easily
not to give away
replaceable
my
too.
corporate experiences, but there's a lot of people that have worked in the offices I've entertained in my life. Uh, so you're stuck in that. You're stuck in that situation, and that is feminine. That is passive. An active job, you might say, is being like a CEO, where you do exert some kind of influence. And yeah, maybe that's not as active as being an independent hunter or something. You have to balance it ultimately. You can't have a purely masculine or feminine lifestyle. There's a certain ideal androgyny
That
in the
that's
world out there.
that's probably the executive. And then real quick before I don't want to again throw any guys off. At the executive level, and I post
Hmm.
again. I was posting about this recently. The executive level is the closest thing to that you can get to that sort of masculine archetypal figure, right? Like the
Hmm.
traditional man, if you will. But yeah.
I guess that's kind of what I like about Palea. She does acknowledge a lot of these facets of modern society, but she dislikes them, or I should say, she likes that they've gone away because she's a feminist. So it's fun to read her work, or to see things that she said, or
Yeah.
to see them
She
interpreted in some way,
and she hated
because
Foucault too.
yeah, these things are negative developments to me, but good developments to her because she's a feminist. It's the same thing with like Beauvoir. I love Beauvoir, who says something like, as so long as woman is constrained by her biology, her necessity to be a mother, her ovaries, literally. I think Beauvoir says that a woman must excise her own womb to be free. I agree with that. I just don't think they should. I don't think they should get rid of that. You could say that second wave feminism and birth control and development of that is how they've excised that biological responsibility. But I don't agree. I don't think that's a good thing. So I do enjoy I do enjoy some of Bob's interpretations here when he talks from using feminist perspectives, but in the reverse. I find that interesting.
And just to point out that the Bapsphere especially brings attention to this is that this oppressive structure that develops this feminine man or this homosexual man starts out almost in the kindergarten, because the kindergarten itself is almost this structure that takes the boys that are full of
Very
energy
much
and want to
so.
go outside and have
Hmm.
fun and explore into the classrooms. And you see that the little girls excel much better in working in the tests and in
Yeah.
learning than the
Definitely.
boys do. And you should, and you'd say, well, and you could say that, well, the girls are smarter, that's why they succeed. Well, not really, because when you take the tests and see everything, the boys get better results and are smarter on some level in the questions of the IQ. But because the boys have this program to go outside, to have fun, to explore, they don't pay as much attention to the education, and then they get punished for it. So that's interesting, and it's interesting to see that it starts out in infancy almost. But
Yeah.
once again, the kindergarten started out as a way to let the worker, the father, and later the mother have time for their job. Because so the kindergarten didn't start because, well, let's have a kindergarten. It was essentially a way to allow the father and the mother to go work while someone took care of the kid. And that's not because, well, women decided that way. It's because society itself structured it that way, or or because it was a necessity from the time of the beginnings of industrialization. So that's interesting, and that's why when we point out the idea of the matriarchy and the whole woman-hating side of the sphere, it's like, well, okay, yeah, go ahead, hate woman, but how much is that? And this is perhaps a female way of talking, but how much is that self-resentment or resentment, and how useful is that to fixing the status quo? It's not, from my perspective at least. And BAP
Yeah.
perhaps takes it a bit too far. Just to finish up and to
Mhm.
bring up the other section, because BAP, when he bases himself in these abstracts, and then you in the section 70 something, he says that dissident movements shouldn't allow women, but they should allow different people from different backgrounds, different ethnic groups. And it's like, you're basing yourself on abstracts,
Right.
and that's why you're
Mhm.
justifying it. But someone that lives abroad and someone that travels the world for work or for student stuff, for studies, um, you come to find out that you have a lot more in common with a woman of your nationality than you do with a man of another nationality. And because you have this culture and these values that are intrinsic in you, that are only shared to the people of your group, that even if you want to be this revolutionary or this dissident, you still have a limit to how much you can attach yourself to someone from a different group. So that's why
Very
the
true.
abstraction of it
Mhm.
all is different. It's perhaps the abstraction of it all is where I have the most friction. But I guess I hate abstractions, and that's all that. And I'll be called perhaps somewhat of a feminist for all my defense of women. But hey, it's Women's Day. It's Mother's Day. So
I love
Yeah,
women. I
fuck them.
defend it.
Fuck
I
them.
believe in women's rights. Uh,
I'm a
I so
respecter,
just
definitely.
yeah, just
Okay,
one
all
more
right, go
point
ahead.
about the matriarchy before we continue on to another section. We don't live under a matriarchy. Like that doesn't need to be said. It
Yeah,
shouldn't need to be said. We don't live under a matriarchy. We might you might say that we have like a longhoused society, but the people in power are still men. We don't have a woman president. We don't have
and
women officials in
yeah,
any meaningful capacity.
and of a
We
very
live
particular persuasion, very particular ilk, if
of
you
a
catch
very
my
particular
drift.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so how can you look at that society and come to the conclusion that we're in a matriarchy? It doesn't make sense. There are real matriarchal societies that exist out in the world. They're generally more tribal and undeveloped, but they do have they do have social norms and inheritance structures that are oriented towards the
yeah.
women.
The
We don't live in one.
Polynesians. Yeah, yeah.
We
And
don't.
it's
We are
funny
not
because
a
Bob praises
matriarchy.
the
So,
Hive,
hmm?
and the Hive is as a queen bee. So when
Mhm.
Bach talks about the hive, and the hive is actually a good society because everyone has their purpose. Well, the hive is a matriarchy because it has the queen bee. So that's interesting to point out.
Yeah, but it goes back. This argument falls apart because again, we do not live under a matriarchy. It is men. It is the inherent femininity within men, the
Right.
passivity. And I think I don't know if we've
I,
discussed in a talk like this before, but definitely in some tweets or maybe in private, there's an inherent risk aversion to the way society is structured that is passive. It is this idea that we should not actively influence the world around us. We have structured society based on feminine ideals, not women, but femininity as it is reflected in men. It still
yeah.
remains patriarchal in structure, but
Right.
it is
I,
feminine in pathos.
Definitely, I would absolutely agree with that. That's a excellent way of putting it. And also, again, these men of a particular ilk, I would say this a term from Yaki, which I am quite fond of. Is the culture distortion that results from this parasitic this parasite sort of infecting the host, right? And then that's what happens under culture distortion. So you might see it as like, oh, this is this very matriarch, but it's not at all, you
Hmm.
know what I mean. This is sort of instilled, and in I would say in BAP's defense, I do think that in the somewhere in the 30s, I have it in my notes here, but somewhere in the 30s he does in those between 30 and 36 somewhere. He does talk about this a little bit, right? That not the overall point that you're making about this is instilled by this sort of, I'll just say it, like, the sort of Zionist infiltration, or the Jays. I think that's fine, but yeah, it's instilled by them, and it's distorted, and that's why you get these phenomena, and like, for example, the incel, right? And I know that that's, whatever, that there's like
Yeah,
multiple,
I have
there's,
gripes with incels and the incel movement, if you want to
yeah,
call it that. We
right.
don't need to discuss that now, but
No,
yeah,
right, exactly. But he does. So I think he does point
Yeah, I
that out,
mentioned
to
it
his credit. Yeah, he
hmm
mentions that fact. And
in,
I
in
I
2018, which is crazy. Yeah, a bit. It's like
yeah.
I wouldn't say that's
it wasn't
crazy. The
that known.
incel movement did
No,
exist at that time. I remember the
It
sort
did.
of
It was like at
beginnings
the
of it.
very begin. Yeah, yeah. Because a lot of
It
that,
wasn't the
again.
modern iteration of incel movement. So the distinction. I don't mean to. I enjoy internet culture, so I do know a few things here and there.
Yeah,
At the
yeah.
beginning, the incel movement was more simply a group of people who could not get laid, and
Right.
and that's the perspective he's drawing his arguments based upon. The modern incel movement is an ideological
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
anti-feminist movement
It's
that
almost
does
turned
not.
into the Volcel.
It doesn't, yeah, it doesn't necessarily constrain itself with whether somebody has lost their virginity or not. That is still a major part of it, but it carries this baggage of being an anti-feminist, a misogynist.
Right. Yeah,
Even though,
yeah.
and you do see that semantically, a lot of people use the term incel for people who clearly have sex but are just not. They're women haters, basically.
Right. Yeah,
it's almost
yeah, be perfectly
So
frank
it
about it.
becomes, yeah, the modern iteration of that term is kind of obfuscate from what he originally intended to criticize, what he originally intended. And I do agree that the original idea, the incel movement, as he describes, it deserves, it is effeminate. It deserves criticism for being unjustified and kind of passive. I don't like it. I don't like incels. I don't like the way they orient themselves towards the world. Every now and then I'll see like sorry, I don't mean to. I'll finish up. Every now and then I'll see one of those posts from one of those incel accounts, and it's like it's comparing like a really handsome man saying something to a really ugly man saying something, and it's like the woman's gonna like the handsome. Of course, the woman's gonna fucking like the handsome man more. Like what a good fucking job,
yeah,
good
yeah.
observation.
Right.
Crap,
You're
hands
right.
down. You
Yeah.
fucking you figured it out. Handsome people are
Right.
better than ugly people.
Right.
Good
Right.
job.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's
Know your
it's
know your
constantly
limits.
complaining and nagging. Like oh, why don't I get, why don't I get the fucking
Yeah,
pussy
it's
anymore?
it's pure nihilism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that it reached this almost post-ironic way of being the term, because
Yeah.
everybody can call themselves an incel, and
Right, right.
everybody can be called an incel. That it's reached almost the loss of meaning. But
Yeah.
when talking about the incel, perhaps we should touch a bit on it, because there's a few groups in our sphere that are still those incels that Bab talked about in 2019, which are so covered by this distortion of reality, this resentment and this hatefulness, that they can conceptualize a collective the collective that represents the nation, in the sense that they can conceptualize the man and the woman as a group, as a collective of that
No, they're
belong,
antagonistic towards
because
women in general.
they're
They
too
see them as the
antagonistic
enemy.
towards women, exactly. And that's ultimately corrosive to the movement and to the sphere as a whole, because, well, women are a part of your nation, women are a part of the movement, whether you like it or not, even if indirectly. So when you that resentful, it actually hurts the progress of the movement. And Bap will talk about families in one of those 70 section, in the one of those 70, the sections around section
Set
70,
yeah,
where
Yeah,
it
but
says
70
he's
that,
to
placed it as
77.
a lower importance to fraternity. He does see fraternity as still
yeah,
being of greater
Yeah.
value.
it
Uh,
it's
oh,
it's
sorry. Did you go ahead, Ryan? Go ahead.
yeah, just to finish up, it's interesting to go into this family thing, because it's interesting because Al Bab says that it's somewhat pacifying, but at most it's like, go have kids or whatever, but don't treat it as a political accomplishment. And I think that's interesting, because before reading it, I was my perception of Bab on this aspect was very negative. I thought that he considered family a completely pacifying agent that stopped revolutions, and to a degree he considers it that. But
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
it's very poignant to point out that in modern times there's almost this worship of the family as a political accomplishment to win. And to the degree that it's an accomplishment, yes, it is. In modern times, having a family is actually an accomplishment. But is it enough of an accomplishment? No, it's not. And I think right now there's almost this worship of this conservatism
Yeah.
that declares that if everybody had a family and had two or three kids, the world wouldn't have problems, or
Yeah.
the nations, European nations, wouldn't have problems. And no, of course they would. And if if you're pacified by the family, and I don't think we should touch on this because it will go on a big tangent, but the whole wife jack
Oh
debate
my.
was
Yeah.
practically
Yeah.
this. And
Right.
Yeah.
and if you guys want to touch on it, we can, but that's
Well,
going to be a tangent. So perhaps let's avoid it.
Yeah. I mean, we could
yeah.
just
Yeah.
say briefly. I
Uh,
agree. Actually, this is one of the points
yeah.
that I agree vehemently with Bap.
Uh,
I actually criticize like a lot of those people who think that we should boost our fertility rates. I don't believe that is a
it's
necessity for
not a
the movement.
necessity. Yeah.
I think, in fact, there are too many people. Now, don't go around calling me Bill Gates or something. But I'm not saying we should start killing off swaths of the population. But there is a certain carrying capacity that every species reaches. We are a biological creature. As much as we try to avoid associating ourselves with animals, we cannot have billions and billions of people in the world. It's not sustainable environmentally or socially. We're already at the mercy of these kinds of overpopulating forces. So the idea that we should just breed like seven white children for every white person is like, yeah, that's fucking insane. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
Yeah, to have a
And
Pragmatically,
farm or something like that away from
yeah,
society,
yeah.
that's the worst idea. That's the worst
yeah,
idea
it
in
is.
many ways.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's politically pacifying as much as it's politically unhelpful, whether it
Yeah. Right.
pacifies you or not.
Yeah, and there's two points I wanted to bring up, like the baby boomer generation, right? Lots of kids. There was a big baby boom, and then in the '60s you had sort of this kind of soft social revolution that completely overhauled the. I mean, I wouldn't call it the traditional structure, but it was like, there is this sort of pre '60s and post '60s regime that changed quite a bit, and there was still some conflict of like very serious statesmen that were involved within the American state that were actively fighting this and they lost, right? So as far as
Hmm.
like, oh, let's have lots of kids and everything will be fine, and that's obviously not true. We saw that it did happen after the Second World War, right? Europe decimated, and then you saw like there was a big baby boom, and what happened, right? And then also there's was a meme. Speaking of memes, real quick, and this is the last thing before we move on. Um, there was a meme recently, like America of 80 million, or I saw you, Rain, you posted a Portugal of 7.7
Yeah,
million or
that was
whatever,
a funny
right?
one.
Hmm.
Yeah, and as it was thinking of a gentleman, Paul Fahrenheit, who I really really like his work. I think he's an excellent writer. He gave a great talk on Yaki at one of the Skildings events a couple years ago, and I he was talking about how like the white man needs space, right? Americans, like us, we as Americans or as Europeans, like you need like these giant wide open spaces, right, to live. Like, and Bat does talk about this in the book, I think in like the 36s, around 36 or 37, like the distinction between like the civilization. And I realize I touched on this earlier. Like the civilization is not just this like a hive, right? Or like the bug man that you see in these huge Chinese cities where there's just like barely room to breathe. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I would say that those two aspects are highly relevant. Although, yeah, having children is good, and I encourage people to do so. I think it brings joy to one's
But it should be a
life.
political imperative. I think that's the
Yes,
important part.
yes, that is. I think that's the perfect way to end on that before we jump into the 70s. Do you guys want to head into the 70s now? The
Yeah,
the this
absolutely.
sort of
Let's
Yeah,
this,
yeah, and we can connect it to this talk because I believe
yeah,
it's in the 70s that he starts talking about the Anglo-conservative wanting to be left alone, and that's
Mhm.
why,
right,
and this is a quote directly, and that's why the state was taken over by vermin. And this is a quote from the book, so YouTube is not my fault. No, just kidding.
no, no,
So that's
no, yeah, you're
interesting
right.
because it's the whole politic of or the whole experiment of wanting to be left alone and to be on a farm and have a lot of children and be happy. And it's like, well, first off, that's almost an dream. That's almost unachievable for most people right now. So how much of that is just dreaming? But then it's like it's the idea that the moment you do that, the state is open for grabs, and whoever grabs it wins. And well, most often is the vermin. I think it's Mike and May that was actually influenced by BAP that wrote in harassment architecture, you never be able to see 50 foot, 50 50,000 foot statues because a group of vermin infiltrated the government and stopped you from that. And well, when we keep promoting this, and it's 2025, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, yes, fine, let's think about that. But we've reached a point where thinking that it's so oblivious. You basically saying that, well, I wouldn't mind living in Brazil as long as I had my farm, because that's where most countries are headed right now. We saw it
Right,
with
right.
Canada. Canada took like 5 or 10 years, and it's unlivable now for the people that lived there before. And we'll see it everywhere. We see it in Portugal right now, and in many European countries. So this idea, and we still see people promoting it. This idea of wanting to live in a farm and creating this community when it's your last chance and that's the only thing you can do, fine. We see it in South Africa, and in South Africa is commendable, yes. But when we see it in European countries thinking this way, it's unimaginable. It's giving up. It's not riding the tiger, as Evo says it. It's not riding the tiger as much as it's surrendering it. You're surrendering. You're surrendering. That's what you're doing. And when the state is infiltrated by the vermin that Bob talks about, the vermin, the first thing it will do is crush you. So how much is, well, you have your farm and you have your chickens, and the state will have the jets and the tanks and will come over there and crush it. It's the moment you start being a trouble or too annoying. So how much of that is really worth it to promote? Well, family is important, so yeah, let's promote family, but it's not a core value as Wiswin said it. The family is almost like an indirect result of solving the problem.
Yeah,
The same thing
it's
with
not a
many
Yeah.
other.
political. Yeah, it's not a
Once,
political
yeah, once
signifier.
society's more amenable to traditional values, then family will naturally be consequence from it.
Yeah, and we see that in most cases right now, when you ask young people if they would like to have kids, most say yes, but can't because of economics. or some other reason. It's never no, I don't want kids, or that's like a minority. So it's just to prove that the moment you solve the societal structure, and the moment that you solve our major problems, which isn't really fertility as much as it's immigration, or the housing crisis, or the costs of living right now in major cities. As much as you when you solve those issues, you see it trickle down to more
Yeah,
happier people, and
Yeah.
stronger
yeah.
families and all of that. So it's once again it's a negotiation in the sense that you're negotiating. You're telling your enemies this. You're telling them, well, let me live in a farm until I'm really old, and when I'm really old, come crush me, and that's fine by me. No, it's not. Of course, it's not, because most countries in Europe and even the US have this long-standing history. And the moment you're basically saying that, well, I'll give all of this up to live a life of hedonism. In a
Hmm.
certain sense, you're like those hedonistic boomers that have given up in the first place, and now you're giving up as well. But it's like 50 years later. So what are you doing?
It's
And
like the trad thing. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll just throw this in real quick. And I was talking about this the other day, like trads, right? And whatever. Like I like the idea of the traditional, but in order to get there, like first of all, like this pastoral agrarian living, like we're not that's long gone, and so we sort of need to again. We talked about this last week, or the week before, perhaps that we kind of need to adapt to the times. And I know in a space, the three of us talked about the idea of like there might have to be some distasteful like if your goal is like radicalism and to sort of achieve this sort of archeo-futurist state, I'll say. Then there might have to be some distasteful things that trads might not like. And I'll also add to the as far as fertility is concerned, like that's often used as a justification for more immigration and more offshoring, right? Like, oh, we need to bolster social security, so therefore we need to import like huge numbers of foreign populations. Or there's all sorts of justifications for like the fertility thing, right? And then yeah, like a state, if this agrarian living, like I just want my farm and to be left alone, it's very libertine. It's like a libertine political ontology, and it leaves you open to be again to like a cultural parasitic element to coming in and just taking over, subverting your state and crushing you, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely this strain of libertarianism that remains on the right. This romanticization of the pastoral lifestyle, the self-sustenance, where you don't really belong to society and you can live out on your own. There was a time when you saw a lot of sort of memes, statements from people, right wing accounts,
The
and they
wheat
would revolve
fields.
around, yeah, not just the wheat fields, but this idea that people only became political in this sphere because they weren't left alone, quote
that's
quote, left
that's so
alone.
disgusting. I hate that one.
I hate it
Yeah,
too. You don't see it that
I
much
just want to
anymore.
grill.
Yeah, I just want to grill. It's 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 not realistic. People don't become political because of that. People are always political. Everything we do in life is a reflection of some political ideal. But that's a philosophical statement for another time. That reflects the libertarian strains from where a lot of the modern right evolved from. That BAP was able to sublimate the energy of into an actual cohesive, genuine right wing movement. Again, bringing back some of my earlier praise for what he did when he established his sphere. When it comes to things like fertility, though, and the idea that we should strive for a more fertile nation. I don't like you. It seems so mechanistic to say that. Like we need to be a more fertile people, like we're rabbits or sheep or something. And maybe that does dive into some of the shepherding aspects that the people
Yeah.
in power, that like Elon Musk. I'll name drop him. He talks a lot about fertility. He wants us to be a very fecund people. Uh, I don't know
I
why
think it
it's funny to use
I
that
think it
term.
matters who is also having the children
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
which
but
I don't want to say it, but we'll call it the E word. I think we all
yeah,
kind
but
of
when he
know.
says when he says it, he says it because he needs more laborers, he needs more consumers.
Yep,
Capitalism,
yep.
the structure we live in is dependent on two classes of people: the people who make things and the people who buy things. And once you stagnate on either of those ends, you start to lose profit. And as we know, we have to live in a constantly profitable
Supply sider.
society.
Yeah. Line
So
go up.
from that perspective, I'm kind of anti-fertile. I think we should not promote that. We should be content with population degrowth. I'm a deflationist. Don't increase the prices, don't increase the population, don't increase the industrial output. We need to be content with where we are and accept that society exists in a cyclical capacity. It's going to increase and decrease as we continue and move along the course of history. And so long
Quality.
as it so long as
Yeah.
it maintains some internal stability without importing, a bunch of, I don't know, random people from halfway across the world, so long as we can maintain our homogeneity, our cultural and racial homogeneity, it's okay for that decrease to occur. We don't need constant growth. People should accept a life where you might not be able to buy 10 new pairs of clothes every month. You'll have to be content with the ones you have, and maybe you can buy yourself a nice sewing kit and stitch it up yourself instead of
Quality over quantity.
going to the Bangladeshi cashier at your local I don't know, Bloomingdale's or whatever the fuck. I don't know malls. I haven't shopped at a mall in like years. You go there and you buy your polyester t-shirt. Maybe you should just be content with less. So I'm pro tariffs.
Yeah.
Uh,
uh,
I think there's also this concept of and I will touch upon this. I want to touch on this, which is
mm,
the two poles of our sphere, which is, I consider BAP the expansionist, and
yeah.
perhaps Keith Woods as this defensive protectionist, and in the sense that there's the defensive nationalism, which says that it's nationalism for all, and we
Right.
just want to be left alone.
Mhm.
And then we have BAP, and I'm gonna have to agree with BAP on this, which is this more expansionist, vitalistic way of nationalism,
Yeah.
where we should expand.
Yeah.
And which one is right, that we don't need more people as much as we need more um, ambition. Perhaps ambition is the
We
right
need
word to
people of
use.
better quality.
Yeah, quality over
We need people
Yeah,
who
quantity.
are more actively participating in their own national interests rather than people
and
who kind of exist to be consumers as we've been situated to be.
yeah, exactly. And when we try to build this nationalism and this sphere, this nationalistic sphere, when we settle for just wanting to be left alone and nationalism for all, well, this has never happened before. I don't remember a time
Hmm.
in history where everyone agreed to be nationalism for all, and
Right.
that's it.
It's not
Not even
realistic.
in Europe. It's not realistic. And BAP touches on the expansionist and the vitalistic expansion, and that's the for and I have to agree, and I have to say that that's the aspect we should embrace, because we shouldn't. I mean, 500 years ago, Europeans were colonizing the world with much less people than we have right now. So it's not a problem of fertility or resources; it's a problem of ambition. And when we accept this, perhaps this defensive position, even if it's strategic, you're giving up ambition, and you're also going for the Spencer side of going mainstream. And when BAP brings the subversiveness and accepting this subversiveness, I think he's right in a way that he then talks about Forshan as being more efficient than even the state and the CIA. And to a degree, he's right because it's more decentralized. But because it has
Yeah.
this,
Hmm.
because the underground or the Forshan or the subversiveness comes with ambition that isn't as present in the mainstream or in civilization. And this is coming from Bap himself, because civilization he considers as this pacifying and this oppressive element that corrupts the vitalistic nature of man. But society doesn't have to be that way. And Bab talks about that when he talks about infiltration, and this is where I want to advance. when he talks about infiltration, and there's almost this hoping of the coming Caesar or Napoleon, which will rise in the ranks and change everything. And I have no real opinion on this, so I would love to hear your guys' opinion on infiltration and the practicality and efficiency of infiltration when discussing
Yeah.
this point. Because personally, I don't have a really determined opinion on it. So I'll let you guys take it.
Yeah, you want to say something first, Nick?
Yeah, sure. I'll say yeah. As far as this idea of this is where I saw a critique. Now, on the one hand, you have this notion of like, okay, if you the sort of men of a higher quality, right? Should enter into these professions or whatever, enter into the regime and try to like work from within. This has been like a topic that gone back and forth with for a long time in this sphere, right? Like it's for pretty much as long as I've been around it. I've heard this stuff. And it's like entryism versus radicalism or revolutionary politics, right? Now, revolutionary politics today are not the sort of revolutionary politics we saw 100 years ago or whatever, right? So you do have that aspect, and so this idea of entryism and like you go into one of these agencies, right? And if you can do it, if you can pull it off, but here's my critique of that. I guess my core critique is that when you go in there and you hide your power level, quote unquote, for how at what point do you expose it, right? Like you just work and work and work, and eventually you end up just basically helping the regime further its own interests. I don't see how, unless you can get enough people to do it and then take action, but I don't see that happening. So now, on the other hand, if people are doing that and simultaneously coordinating with those building parallel structures outside of the system, then I could see that happening. Absolutely, it seems like a possibility that could happen. But this idea that infiltration, and we need to infiltrate and wait until this what does he say, this comet of Caesar or Napoleon comes
Yeah,
out,
Caesar or
and
Napoleon.
yeah, it comes out and sort of saves us. I don't see that happening unless you have to actually make it happen. Like if you look at Caesar, Napoleon, these were men of action. They didn't just, well, first of all, there was this sort of this aspect of divinity, right? That you don't control, right? That are out of our hands, right? And conditions and events unfold, and you don't really know where that's going to go. But at the same time, you have to seize upon when those events and conditions are seem applicable or seem uh, possible to take advantage of. Then you need to act, right? Caesar did this, Napoleon did this, other figures of the 20th century did this, March on Rome sort of thing, if you know what I mean. And Franco did this as well, like getting Germany to basically take his entire army across. I'm forgetting the name of
Yeah,
anyways,
Gibraltar, all right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So, like this idea of just sitting and sort of waiting for the comet of Caesar Napoleon to come and save us, the Caesarism aspect. I don't think that is going to work unless you also have radicals and subversives outside the system working and coordinating, which is very difficult to do. And there's this idea that by a guy named Tom Metzger, who was kind of like a Nash's 1.0 guy, WN 1.0, like from the 80s and stuff. And he ran for Congress a few times in California, and he did incredibly well. But he's still, same thing with guys like David Duke, who did incredibly well in the gubernatorial race, but then the Republican Party basically forced him out. They all endorsed the Democratic governor, the gubernatorial candidate, and he lost. So you're not going to get anywhere just solely trying to infiltrate the regime unless you have a subversive and element on the outside subverting the regime, and then maybe people within the regime subverting it, and then building something like a positive critique, as Dominic Venner called it. You need a positive vision, a positive critique, and something that isn't going to turn the public off. Because even though we shouldn't be overly concerned with the public as like populists, right? I don't think that I think we need sort of a vanguardist element. You do have to sort of make it known that their lives aren't going to be completely like they aren't going to be like put into mass graves, so to speak, right? Um, so I think yeah, you need that positive vision, and if you're going to sort of infiltrate or like successfully try an entry strategy, you need more than just like a few people. You need lots and lots of people to do it, and I think that that takes quite a bit of time. I don't see this happening overnight. I see this, and I think BAP again, to his credit, points out that this is sort of going to be a struggle for the long haul.
Yeah, I think those are all fantastic criticisms, and I'd like to add a few on the, I guess, less pragmatic side, and more just on how these, how society is structured inside these organizations. I think Bob severely underestimates how much of an effect a single individual can have as being a member. So let's say you do join the CIA. You're a right wing nationalist, and you join the CIA with a covert goal to reform it and to convert it into this, I don't know, this modern right wing vitalist organization that's going to save white people. How much influence can a single person have? Not a lot. The way that these organizations are structured is the same as any kind of corporate entity. It's built in such a way that you are a cog, you are a single gear, you do a
Yep.
single function ultimately. That is not really something you decide. It's not something that you can choose between two different options. Like, let's go fund. Like what Bob might insinuate here is that you're a CIA agent, and you're poised with a set of different organizations that you can allocate funds to. Like, I'm going to put $1 million towards this right wing militia, or $1 million to this subversive communist militia that's going to infiltrate the government in some third world nation. You don't make that decision as an agent within these
Right.
organizations.
Right. You're
You're
a
given
bureaucrat.
you're a bureaucrat. You're given a task. You're given a piece of paperwork. You read over, you summarize it or something, you sign it off, and that's it. You don't make a decision. In order to influence the direction of any of these organizations, you need to be able to make a decision. But nobody, and this is sort of showing a like a Mark Fisher kind of foundation. This is the call center. You don't make any of these decisions. Nobody does. You're stuck in this bureaucratic apparatus that functions purely on its own accord. It is a set of values have been established that precede your entire life. You don't know where the source of control is here, but regardless, even if you did, you wouldn't be able to influence it. And that's the issue with infiltrating, any kind of organization. What Bob might insinuate in another sense is that if you're just one person, if 100 cogs in this machine start to grind against the natural flow, you start to become antagonistic towards that bureaucratic direction that the organization is being led in. Maybe you can come together in a more centralized, direction oriented manner to influence in a right wing way, the CIA or whatever. But that that necessitates on some level that there is already a centralized authority. You cannot have a bunch of directionless people decide the same thing. They don't communicate. I'm not talking to my coworkers, I suppose. If there were a more organized effort, like you had 1,000 people who all applied and started joining the CIA, they were part of, I don't know, a hypothetical
Right.
Baptist organization. They all infiltrated together. They had a very set goal, a very set strategy of how they were going to make their way up into the higher echelons of the organization. And then they come out as CIA director. And it's like, all right, TND today. We begin. Maybe maybe that's effective, but that's not pragmatic. That's not realistic. That will never
No.
happen, because what BAP is saying here is that you, as an individual, are going to join this organization and hope that other people of a similar mindset will also join, and by some magical convoluted methodology, you're going to come together and you're going to change this country for the better. That's not going to happen. That cannot happen. Functionally impossible. You cannot change the fundamental structure of an organization simply by infiltrating it. That is not something that has ever occurred in history. All
Right.
organizational
You
change
it'll
is
still have
from
this.
outside influence. It's
Yeah.
forced upon it by the necessity of the time. The CIA has changed, since its founding
Immensely, immensely. They used to be
immensely.
very good
But
at coups, and now they suck
yes,
at them.
but that change is not is not from within. It's from outside. It's just from executive function. It is from the Congress or the executive branch declaring that this is what the CIA must do now. It is from other organizations, if you want to get more conspiracy, uh, is from other organizations outside the CIA that have directed it, but never inside. No person has infiltrated these organizations and brought about any realistic change. It's a bureaucratic apparatus. So that is my first criticism of BAP here. But I know we discussed a little earlier, not in the call, but in private, about trying to abandon BAP as a figure when discussing some of his ideas. But I think it is very important here to mention it, because it gives way to some of his, I guess, ethnic heritage. This is a very messianic philosophy. What BAP is saying here is essentially pray and believe that the Messiah, the right wing Messiah, is going to come around, the Caesar Napoleon figure. He's going to come around and he's going to change everything. And when that comet occurs, it's like snap. Everybody's gonna follow behind him.
Right.
We're gonna rally behind this general, and he's gonna change everything. It is pure messianism. It is and the reason I say we shouldn't bring up his heritage here is because that's a very Jewish philosophy. Jewish, Jewish
Yeah.
religion is
Yeah.
oriented around the idea that the
Yeah.
messianic
Messy.
figure is going to
Yeah.
return. And so you do see that, as much as he larps as a pagan in his mindset, a Bronze Age pagan, that underlying messianism seeps through here. And that's also why this last section is really divergent from the earlier parts of the book, where he stops being more philosophical and being more pragmatic about how he wants to exact change. Because when he tries to drive these ideas about how society can change, he does have to take from his real life experience. He does have to take from his actual real life opinions. He can't just bring up a random philosopher and say, based on this or that, mentality, feminism, whatever. He can't just pull these random ideas into the abstract. He has to have something material, and that materialism is going to, by necessity, be derived from his inherent psychological foundations, the way that he thinks as a person. So I think that shows really cleanly here this messianism that is pretty. It's not going to work. It's not functional. It's not pragmatic, and it's not something that we can really believe will happen. Napoleon and Caesar are not Messiah. They're not messianic figures. They did not come into this world and exact fundamental change by some divine right. They were figures that were human. They existed by the circumstance of their time. They were, if it weren't Napoleon, it would have been somebody else, another Corsican, a French person, or
Right.
somebody
Right.
who led the
Yeah.
revolution. There's nothing inherently divine about these figures. Same with Caesar, and maybe that's going against the great man idea of how history functions, but we have to accept some material dialectic here, that
Yeah. They
people are
seize
consequenced by
upon.
the contents of
Right.
their time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, they seized upon they took advantage and they seized upon the
Yeah,
conditions of their age.
and they were good people for that. I do like Napoleon. I do like
Absolutely,
Caesar,
absolutely.
but there's nothing deeply unique about that. People of great proportion, I suppose, come about in lots of different eras. Caesar and Napoleon are just two people that have done it. You can look upon great monarchs. I'm fond of Bismarck, Hitler, and
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
aren't we all? And these are also these are also figures who have been raised to divine proportions in the modern right, when they were obviously just people that existed within a certain circumstance. I was talking, I was talking earlier today, actually with a friend about Joan of Arc. If we are going to be historical revisionists and we look at her and the Marian apparitions that she had, uh, she was schizophrenic in a very clinical sense. She had schizophrenia. She had hallucinations. She saw things that did not exist, that did not have material basis, but they were benevolent hallucinations. They helped her in a way that a modern schizophrenic would not be able to be helped. The modern schizophrenia is defined by how it's actually harmful to the person. The person has these apparitions that are, I don't know, telling them to kill themselves or something. It's negative. It's a negative thing. But because the time period allowed for it, she could sublimate that mental disorder. I guess I don't like saying mental disorder, but she could sublimate her pathology into something positive, something that could be used for political ideological means, because that was simply the religious context of the time. If people were It was expected on some level
That's
that if you
interesting.
were a zealous person, you would have hallucinations. You would have these visions of Jesus and God and the
Prophecy.
angels. Yeah, and that's the same. That's how I look at people like Napoleon and Caesar. They existed in these times when you could do these things. Can a Caesar or Napoleon come about now? If there were a person with the same psychology, the same mental strategic fortitude that Napoleon had, if he were born today and he, I don't know, got elected to some position of governance, would he be able to do anything with that? Can you have a Napoleon today? Not in the same way. It has to be somebody who's catered very specifically to the current circumstances. So waiting around for a messianic figure is not realistic. We need to take action as it suits ourselves in the moment, when the circumstances align uh, with our interests. We have to take advantage of that. We can't just wait around. And I don't like BAP for saying that. I don't like BAP for insinuating that we need to wait for some figure who's not even well described. What are we looking for in our right wing messiah? Just some vague idea that he's going to be Caesar or Napoleon. Caesar and Napoleon are Caesar and Napoleon because of what they did after they took initiative. If you saw Caesar when he was just a general, writing, the Gaelic Wars or something, would you have known that he was going to become the emperor of Rome? And the same thing, if you were at the military academy with Napoleon, would you have known that he was going to become this great, emperor of France? You wouldn't. You can only say these things in retrospect. So a right wing figure is not going to come out. We're not going to know that this person is going to be the world changing right wing figure until they actually change the world. So we need to be initiative on our own accord. We need to
Yeah.
take our own ideological beliefs and at least put them out there, at least present them to the world so that they can interact, so we can interact with it. I mean, that's what we do on Twitter. That's what we do here. We present our beliefs and
Hmm.
we interact with like-minded people, and we do try, in the very least, to convince others that our beliefs are correct.
Yeah, you presented great points with Swin, and it's like I'm coming from my background is from reading Evola, so I dream of the great man also. So I'm to blame for that, and well,
Yeah, I don't
your
mean to
points
say
are
it's bad. Yeah, I think
Same here,
great
same
men
here.
are good. Like
Yeah,
it
I'm a
is good to
Carlisle
advocate for
Carlisle
greater than
enjoyer.
life people. But those greater life people can also be emergent from the circumstances of their time. They don't. There's nothing inherently great. I mean, I guess that's a wrong way to put it. Like their inherent greatness is valid. Like they are clearly superior people in the sense that they took initiative and they took advantage of the circumstances to rise into that position of power and that position of authority. But it does depend a lot on the environment. So
yeah,
yeah, that's still good.
they existed within the context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, but your points are great, and we touch upon that. Your point about Joan of Arc was particularly interesting because we touched upon the importance of that context of religious understanding that's lacking in today's society. So perhaps in today's society, Joan of Arc wouldn't have the part to play that she had in her time.
No, she
So
would have
that's
been
a really
sent to a
interesting
mental
point.
asylum
Yeah,
because she was
obviously,
schizophrenic.
and we talked about it in our other discussion about religion, about the idea of curing psychosis through this initiation or understanding of the religious experience. But your
Hmm.
point about messianism is really interesting because I think it's very weaponized in today's environment of our environment in our sphere, because there's almost this dynamic where every celebrity becomes the or every celebrity or every big account becomes the messiah and
Yep.
must be obeyed by the people
Yeah.
that like him. So and that's weaponized, and that's to a large extent grifting for money or for don't question me. And we see it a lot with figures I won't mention, but we know who it is with their big
Yeah.
legions of
Followers and
followers
yeah.
and all the
Hmm.
griefing that goes on there, and it's very weaponized, and it maintains this stasis of unsatisfaction where we're so dependent on these figures that are supposedly the messiah that will come and that will solve the issues, and then we fund no money to them and they don't do barely anything with them and just keep on
That's
doing what they
yeah.
did without money.
That's
So
the
it's
ultimate. Sorry, go ahead, Rain. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Nick. That was my point.
Uh, I wanted to throw this in real quick because that wouldn't inherently be bad. There's an account who also I don't know his at. I'll shoot him this. I'll shout out to him. His name is Nick, but he was saying that he posted something a couple months back, and I believe I bookmarked it. Because I thought it was an excellent point that he said that these e-celebs, they grift and then they enforce these very rigid ideological standards, um, and and then their followers sort of act like local mafia bosses, right? But
Yes,
and that in itself wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if you're operating on the structure, like if you're functioning at the state level, if you are the state, that necessarily wouldn't be a bad thing if you've already captured power. But they don't, when they do this, they don't actually do anything, right? Like they become the big account, big e-celeb, make lots, grift, make money, and then they don't actually do anything ever, right? So
Hmm.
that, like, that enforcement, like you're just enforcing like bullshit basically. And I thought that was an excellent point. And then anyone who even steps outside of it a little bit, and don't get me wrong, I am for, if you have a slight disagreement with someone, I don't think you necessarily need to air it.
yeah, voice
But
it in private. Yeah,
yeah, right. Don't put it out there.
Yeah, let's
If
start a
it's
list of people we hate. All right, I'll
right.
start.
Right, you know what I mean? Like if you yeah, exactly. If you have like a minor disagreement, but you know that the person's objectives are overall the same as yours, like why are you going to counter signal that? And I've seen like movement or groups that I thought were promising over the past 10 years that have just fallen prey to this time and time and time again. And yeah, that's why I think there is a sentiment, and we're talking about this a little bit before. There is this sentiment right now that, like, there's no one really worth a damn that is out there doing anything. So I
Mhm.
wanted to make that point.
No, it's a big
yeah,
question that BAP tries to answer, like, what do we need to do to reform society? What actions can we actually take as participants in a society that does not conform to our ideological values? And it is a difficult question. I don't think there's a really good answer to it. I don't think BAP's answer is good. I think it's worse than a lot of other answers, but I also don't really have a good answer myself.
Yeah.
If I did, I would
Outside
do
of
it.
Right, outside of metapolitics, I don't have an answer either. And he
Yeah.
does talk about some aspects, some elements of metapolitics, the stickering, the memes, right? I mean, there's been
Yeah,
And that
the
is
prank.
good.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah,
like that. What was it? It's okay to be white. I like that poster.
yeah,
I remember when that was happening. That was
that was
interesting.
great. Yeah, that
It
was
was
great.
nice, transgressive. It showed some of the
Incredibly
flaws
effective.
liberal thinking, but in the end, it was pretty well neutered by society at large. It didn't have any meaningful effect at the end of the day. And if if that's all we can do, then that's kind of that's
petty.
kind of
It's
stupid.
petty.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
petty.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, the idea of the
I don't think
prank.
it's
I
just
mean, I
okay to
read
be
it.
white. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, but the
But
idea of the prank is interesting, but it's inefficient in a way that it becomes petty, and it's just like you're existing this status quo in this context, and the only thing you can do is really prank it. And well, you can prank it and have fun or whatever, but that's not going to solve anything.
no,
And another thing I wanted to touch on was because then Bap delves into the idea of the practicality of the group, of the nationalist group as the instead of the protest group as much more of a Boy Scout thing. And I think the Boy Scout idea is really interesting in a way that because right now we see that a lot of nationalist groups, I think most of them have this idea of we create this group, especially in Australia perhaps. But Nick would know more about that than me because he has more knowledge on the practical sense of those groups. But I guess it seems almost like you create these groups and they become a sort of we get around and we gather when we want to protest. And well, protesting only goes so far. And when we have the influence from evil, we should say that we gather around and we exist and live by example. And I believe these groups, these nationalist groups, and then Bab talks about this, should exist by example as much as they should exist through protest. So instead of just rejecting the system and going against the system, we should create. And that's being done, but create within civilization instead of rejecting civilization and pushing away civilization and existing outside of the context. We should exist within it and build within it and try to well eventually take control of it.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, I think
Definitely.
if we can't at least for the moment, if we can't take active uh, political like if we can't take if we can't actually exert political influence right now, and that is kind of sad, but it is the reality of the situation, then
Yep.
we can at least within our own spheres try to
Network.
advocate for the beliefs that we hold and try to live a life or present that kind of life
Oh
uh,
yeah, as an individual. Yeah,
as
yeah,
an
and kind of
individual.
yeah, and maintain that those sort of standards of I guess like
yeah,
you could say of nobility.
Yeah,
and
and that's
perhaps
kind of
the
sad.
supporting net as well, because we should mention this. I think this is the best time to mention it. Actually, the whole Sheila Hendricks, I believe that's her name, aspect of
Oh
the
yeah,
of the whole recent thing,
Oh
because
yeah,
that
yeah,
because that was really efficient and effectful when we look at it, and
yeah,
that comes with the idea of community and a safe net, and we see that it's almost a form of protest, but it's not a form of protest as much as it's a form of camaraderie and
yeah.
creating a safe net. So that's interesting, and actually goes along with our point right now. So I just wanted to drop it before you
yeah.
get
No,
continue.
I think that was
That's
actually a very interesting event and could
yeah,
even merit a further discussion. But uh, that she was able to say something like that and not be completely ostracized by society at large
right, right. And raise a
indicates
fair
that there
amount of
is some
money.
kind of there is some kind of societal shift. I don't I don't necessarily want to see a society where people are kind of just going around saying
No,
vulgar things, but
yeah, no,
we have to accept that because she was able to say it and garner support for it,
Yes.
what is it up to? I mean, last time I checked, it was like $600,000.
Yeah,
700,000
exactly.
right now, I think.
Wow,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
fucking insane.
And that's sort of what I was
That she
talking
was able to
about.
do that indicates a more normalized acceptance of racism, of right wing mentalities that we haven't seen in decades at this point.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
she said that 10 years ago, I don't think she would have gotten any support.
yeah. Would
I
have
think
been
she would have
done.
just been flat out. I don't cancel say that.
Yeah, even just like probably even about even 5 years ago even. So
Yeah.
and it does kind of signify a sea change, and I always talk about this that there is a that there's a major shift going on right now in the zeitgeist.
Hmm.
We're seeing it happening. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is happening slowly but surely. And I think the best thing that people can do, and one area will again, I every time I do have to give BAP credit where credit is due. Every time I'm pointing the things out in these little bits that we've read, the sections in the book that waiting and oh god, I just lost my train of thought again too. Anyway, when do you guys want to pick it up until I remember it? God
Yeah,
damn
I can pick it up because I
it.
just wanted
Shit.
to finish the Sheol Index thing. Because when we look at these events where it's on the what would I call it without sounding these perhaps less than refined people acting in a less than refined way against others, we shouldn't point the finger when others are pointing the finger as well. And I mean by that is we should create this safety net to protect them, but we should judge them eventually. An example, perhaps
Yeah.
that's I would point out
Mm.
to describe what I'm trying to say is when Caesar came to Egypt and saw the head of Pompey given to him by the pharaoh, and he says that he was a consul of Rome. Well, that's the series. I don't know if you guys watched it, but it's
Right.
just to say
Yeah.
that the Romans punish Romans, not
Right. Not
outsiders
not
punish
Hmm.
Romans.
aliens. Aliens
So
don't punish
when
Rome. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So when we see people from our sphere, and their first reaction is to strike at Shiloh or whatever, even she's the Shiloh isn't even the important aspect of it. But when we see people from our sphere strike immediately at her, it's insane, and it's so traitorous, and it comes back to the resentful aspect of the incel as well, to many. But we should keep in mind that Romans punish Romans, and in that way, we should behave like that as a sphere as a whole, even considering all
Yeah.
the fractured factions and all of that. I believe
Oh, I
Shaul represented that the best because we actually saw unity from all sides, which was
right.
amazing.
Hmm.
I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I remembered what I was going to say. Yeah, it's sort of like what I was talking about earlier with the trad thing, or people is like, "Oh, this is very distasteful." And yeah, I guess I do agree. Yes, it was distasteful, but as Whistling mentioned, we do sort of have to deal with our the conditions of our time, right? The spirit of the age and the material conditions and everything that goes along with that. We can't just abandon that because what we think it's like vulgar or distasteful. Like there is something there are things that might require like vulgarity or distastefulness in order to get in order to achieve what you want. And then yeah, I
Hmm.
wouldn't want to live in a society necessarily where you see that sort of vulgarity constantly, but uh, as far as an event that can help further the overall objectives of a political ideal. Again, I don't like to ever really call it a movement, but this political sphere and the ideological
Hmm.
tenets that are attached to it. I think that it was a positive, right? That we saw this outpouring of support, and especially on the heels of a similar event, which for reasons, of course, of YouTube, I'm not going to go into great detail of, but I think we all know what we're talking about.
Yes.
The slang of that by
Hmm.
the kid.
Yeah,
I
the
forget his name.
opposite situation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
Hmm.
forget. I'm blanking on his name, but anyway. Hey, you guys have any extra points? Oh, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Rin. Yeah.
No, no, go ahead, Nick. Finish your thought.
That was kind of my point. I was sort of trying to think of something we could segue into a little bit.
Oh, okay,
We're
okay.
almost on the 2 hours, so if you guys want to sort of just, I mean, not that there's any sort of time limit, but if you guys want to, just
Yeah,
Yeah, we can
let's
start
try to
wrapping
wrap
it
it
up.
up with the final points. Yeah, because just to finish up this whole modus operandi discussion is is interesting because I've written about it recently, which is in the sense that infiltration and practicality don't matter as much as grasping for the right moment to strike. And I guess we discussed that already, but I just wanted to point out that, well, going into the ride the tiger example, it doesn't matter if you're infiltrating or if you're taking the practical approach of the protest. As much as it matters your disposition and the way you exist within those
yeah.
contexts, as long as you
BAP
maintain
does
that
mention that too.
yes, yes,
Hmm.
it does,
Yeah.
and Evo does as well with the idea of the aristocratic soul and riding the tiger. And I just want to point out because I wrote about it and in which is I believe the Leviathan is on his way out anyway, and Bap writes about the Leviathan, and it's interesting. I believe the Leviathan is destined to fall, and sometime coming ahead, and not doubling into the whole messianic thing we've discussed. But I
Right.
mean, the signs are there,
Mm.
and the
But there
reform
is a
is happening.
shift.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
do
there is a
feel as
shift.
though something is going to collapse. Like it's not a sustainable system, even though it
So
is a
the
very
question,
cohesive one.
yeah, it's a
Very
very
much
complex
so.
system that is refining and it's reforming, but I don't believe it's going to reform in time, or it's going to be able to continue reforming to adapt. So I believe the Leviathan is going
Mm.
to fall, but the thing
Yeah.
our
We're
sphere
in the
doesn't
winter
grasp
stage
yet,
for sure.
yeah, and the thing our sphere doesn't grasp, I believe, as much as it should, since we're so destined to make the Leviathan, so focused to make the Leviathan fall, we don't grasp that the moment it falls, it's almost open war, and there's more factions than ours. So when the Leviathan falls, are we the ones that are gonna take over? Are we ready to take over? Because there's other groups that are also trying to
Mm-hmm.
take over, if you really think
Yeah,
Yeah.
about
I
it,
mean that's the
and
mentality of
there's
like the
nobody discusses
accelerationists.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
and
nobody's discussing the. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
oh, no, I was just gonna say I was having an exchange with it was fairly civil, but yesterday, I brought up the point of this the complexity, the nuanceness of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, and like the idea that like we do have civilizational competitors, right? Like just because like maybe there's overlapping interests at the moment, it doesn't mean that that's always that like those conditions are fleeting, they're temporary, they're not
Hmm.
always going to exist, and and I was getting not really flamed again. It was civil, and I don't hold any ill will to this person. That's his opinion, and like I said, as I was saying earlier, I don't think that we should, over minor disagreements like start flaming each other and going to war over like petty shit. But I do think that there is some nuance with that because like at the end of the day, when this thing, if and when, I don't know if it's going to happen in our lifetimes, but whatever, and when this decline happens, yeah, there are factions out there that are far more ready and willing to take up the mantle that we are currently. And just because there's overlapping interests now, that doesn't mean that that's going to be the case forever.
Yeah,
Exactly.
no,
Exactly.
there's an accelerationist mindset that you see in a lot of the right wing community where if we just bring about the collapse of modern society, then our wonderful right wing ideas will spring up out of the ether and captivate the population. And that is not realistic. We will also be competing with leftists or what's left of them, liberals and right liberals and
Or
communists.
just yeah, or just like a junta, like a military
Yeah.
junta that just is what like Eric Prince, like just anyone who can bring about order, right? Because when these
Yeah.
things happen, there's no, I mean, it's completely unpredictable. That's the thing that I think a lot of people forget. And
But there's
uh,
also there's also an element that we are in a state of warfare right now. We
true, yeah,
exist always in a state of ideological warfare. There's no
yeah,
time of peace. There's no moment where you can sit back and say, "All right, we've won. good,
Yeah,
permanent, it's all done.
Clausewitz.
That
Yeah, Clausewitz is right. Yeah, about or no, it was Bismarck, right? Who's I
mhm.
believe said that politics or warfare is the extension of politics, or I forget if I might be getting that backwards. Warfare is the extension of politics, or something like that. But
Yeah,
anyways,
That
but
was
yes, the
Clausewitz.
sentiment.
oh, it was Clausewitz. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe
the
it was
sentiment
Clausewitz
is
on
true
war.
though. You cannot have a period of peace. You can have a period of no violence, but that's not peace. You're still competing in one way or another. We're all
Yes,
competing.
yes, yes. That was pretty much my point. Yeah, yesterday for sure.
And I don't like accelerationists. And uh, to go back on that messianic point of view, there is sort of a crossover between the modern accelerationists and there's a sect of American Protestants who believe that we should like support Israel specifically because if we support them in starting World War III or something along those lines, it's going to bring about the age of the Messiah, because that's what I guess the Bible predicts, or their interpretation of the Bible predicts to be the case. And that is the same through line that you see with accelerationists. They just don't like to call it. They fancy their jargon up with stupid technological bullshit, uh, tech jargon, AI, whatever crap. It's all the same in the end. These aren't people who think that if society just collapses, then we'll have a tabula rasa from which we can draw whatever new borders and ideological
Right,
boundaries we desire,
right.
and that's
It
and that's not
it's
true. That's not
so
how it works.
Yeah,
Society
right.
we're
isn't going
It's
to
gonna
the
have
collapse
same.
into a state of
yeah.
into a state of nothingness. It's going to collapse slowly and gradually, if anything,
Completely
and it's going to.
unpredictable.
We're gonna
Yeah, and
have
it's
global Brazil.
yeah, you're still going to have people who are like stringent neoliberals. Even in the age of collapse, they're going to be like, well, that society was
Yep.
flawed in some, minuscule way, but overall, the ideas behind it were legitimate, and we should strive to rebuild society in that image. You're never going to have people who are going to just blankly say, well, you know what? I was wrong. Liberalism's bad. Democracy is shit.
Right.
We're gonna move
I'm
on. We're gonna do what's ever next. Okay? You're
yeah,
not gonna have
yeah.
people like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
and
no, that's very true. That's very true, man.
and I think perhaps if you guys want to wrap it up, I think we should wrap it up
Mhm.
with this quote from my perspective, which is when Bap is trying to justify his whole posting of naked men on wine. He actually has a really nice line to justify that. So I'll use it
What?
even with
All right,
outside of
let's
that
do it.
context, which is I'm bored by ideology and by worshipping. I believe in the right of nature. And to this was written in 2018, and it was were bored by ideology and workshopping by then. And in 2015, 2025, 2025,
Mm.
yeah, 2025. I got lost there on the dates, but in our age right now, there's this more general resentment and towards the stasis that our movement is in right now, and no Substack and no book, no next book is going to fix that. And what we keep
Hmm.
getting from our figures are shows, and I guess this is a show or a discussion, but oh well.
Yeah,
We
but
don't
we're better
claim
than
to.
We're
everybody else.
small.
We're smart.
Yeah,
We're good.
Yeah, we're
exactly.
different.
Yeah, and we don't claim
So
to
we
be
keep,
otherwise either.
yeah, and we keep
Yet,
getting books,
yet.
we keep
Gun to our
getting
heads.
shows,
Once
we
we
keep
get to
getting
like a few
pamphlets
million
and
subscribers.
Yeah.
Substacks, and we don't get any action. And the moment we get some action or whatever, it's always counter signaled. It's
Yes,
always
yeah.
counter signaled,
Hmm.
or it's always pointing the finger, and it's like
There's something wrong
um
with it.
It's
It's not the
feds.
perfect. Right.
Look
It's
at the
not the
fucking
perfect.
khakis.
yeah,
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 yeah. It's not the perfect event that I had envisioned in my sort of fantasy world of like how the revolution will come about. And I have to sort of also give some praise to Vladimir Lenin. Actually, I'm a
whoa.
Nazball now.
No, it's
Uh,
all
but
right. Go on. Let's
but
hear your
but
justification.
but Lenin, prior to the bringing down of the Tsar, he did have this coherent vision, and he was able to mobilize. Now, granted, there were, again, as I pointed out earlier, the conditions helped him a great deal, and he seized upon the moment. But he was able to bring together the workers and the peasants in order to, he had a plan for after he toppled the czarist regime.
Mm.
And I
No, that's
think,
that's true. You don't see that same sentiment here. You just see people who,
yeah,
I
well,
don't
it's not
know.
perfect. I
Yeah,
can't. We can't do it because it's not the way I thought, or it's too vulgar, or it's distasteful.
yeah.
It's
It's just
not
like
vulgar
it's
enough.
this isn't the revolution I want. You saw that after every time there's some weird like violent act that somebody commits in wider society. You
Right.
see that in the BAP sphere where they're like, "Well, this isn't the
Yeah.
violence I was talking
Right.
about."
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's a
The
good point.
Pals. Yeah, the Palestinians and flying
Yeah. Oh, I
in and
remember that
take.
was so funny to see that.
Yeah.
We're trying
Yeah.
to, they're trying to be like,
Yeah,
oh,
man.
this, the Palestinians going in their hang gliders and just massacring the Israeli.
Right.
That's not Bronze Age stuff. That's
Right. That's the
something
when.
else.
Right.
What else would it be?
Right. Right. It's like sort
Like
of the pinnacle of Bronze Age
that is the
collapse
pinnacle of
and.
like sea people raiding. Like
Right.
Yeah.
what
Right.
else are you gonna what else are you gonna fucking say it is?
Right, right. No, truly, truly. Rain, he had a back quote, and I have one that I particularly like. Again, it sort
Okay.
of plays into this idea. I pulled it up here, and it's I got a kick out of this one. It said, "Ancient men conquered cities, put them to the sword and fire. Meanwhile, you go to wine bar with GF and enjoy tasteful banter. You are gay."
Yeah, I like that one.
Which
That's
Yeah.
fun.
I mean, you got to give it to him every now and then. And I know we've talked in private a little bit about it, like the baby talk thing and stuff. But I do think
Okay.
every now and then he's right. It's funny. He is a
Yeah, it's funny.
He's a
he can come up
comedian.
right. Yeah, yeah. He's an
Maybe it's
entertainer
his
for sure.
heritage that makes him good at that. There's a lot of comedians where he comes from.
There's a lot of comedians in his part of his tribe for sure.
So, so
So
yeah, you wanna finish up anything with one? Anything with that?
I think I've expressed pretty much all of my points here.
yeah, Rain,
I think
this was I thought this was a brilliant idea on your part, albeit a little crazy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm
no,
just but
I enjoyed the discussion. I think we covered
yeah,
quite a lot of good points here.
yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
for
it's
So
really
reading my
fun.
book. I'm so glad that you like
oh,
my.
you did it. Yeah, you did it way better than I did. I kind of butchered it.
I have a vague Slavic accent. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
That was more
yeah,
French at the end there, but
yeah. Right, right. Thank you for coming to show. Good
thank you
friends
for
on
coming to
this.
show.
Yeah, there
Please.
you go. That was on point. That
Yes,
was spot on, man.
remember that it is important that you have a Bronze Age mindset, except where it hurts me. Okay, do not like the violence I dislike. Be good, infiltrate, but don't do it
What
too
mean?
much.
Okay. Rain, you got any last points you want to say? You want
No, no, that was it for me. I like to end it with a quote on defending posting naked men online.
to?
Yes, it is good to post naked men. It's very
Very,
very
very,
viral,
yeah, very,
viral.
very, yeah. There you go. You're
It's
nailing it, man.
masculine.
Yeah, yeah, masculine. Very, very masculine. I see. I butchered. I'm terrible at
You
it.
see, if you
Okay.
have gay sex, you are not constrained by the longhouse because it is with men, not women.
All
That's
right.
actually the argument on the book.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. Whoever is will be watching this, we always appreciate it. And we're out.